Ambulances, stretchers, blood, and bodies.
The death of Corporal Nachshon Waxman.
Clinton in Israel, Egypt, and Syria. That and more on the JNN World News.
I'm Caroline Greenberg.
And I'm Howard Barbanel. Sadly, almost every program we begin with the latest acts of terror.
Howard, the death toll has hit 88 since the signing of the Rabin-Arafat deal.
Caroline, the latest to die were 3 Israeli soldiers killed kamikaze style on November 11th by a bicycle-riding Islamic holy war terrorist with 20 pounds of TNT in his vest.
3 died and 12 others wounded as the terrorist blew himself to bits. Ambulances rushed to the scene, helicopters evacuated the critically wounded, and brought reinforcements to the Jewish community of Netzarim south of Gaza.
Picture this. You're riding the bus home from school, work, or shopping. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, your bus is blown to pieces. Wednesday afternoon, October 19th, Tel Aviv's number 5 bus traveling Dizengoff Street. An explosion turns the bus into mangled, twisted wreckage. Bodies and body parts were lying all over the street. Medical teams rushed to help the scores of wounded, and police sealed off Tel Aviv's busiest street. 23 died in one of the worst acts of terror in Israel's history. The bomb shattered glass and damaged apartments several floors above street level, along with a bus passing in the other direction. Among the dead were Galit Rosen, a student who would have turned 23 that day, and David Lido, 74, who survived Hitler's concentration camps. What the Nazis didn't finish, the Arabs did, said Lido's daughter. Caroline?
Howard, suicide bombing is the latest mode of attack by the terrorists. Who was responsible for bus number 5? Hamas released this video. The bomber was Saleh Abdal Rahim Hussein al-Sui, who coldly asserted that Hamas would make the whole Jewish people hostages to fear and terror, and that Hamas would continue its suicide operations. A survivor of the blast and one of the witnesses had this to say.
I didn't know something exploded. I thought something fell on me only, the mirror or something like that. And I sat down and I wept, and I was full of blood.
Howard, I imagine the opposition had some reaction to this.
Caroline, opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu appeared all over television.
Once again, terrorists have struck a deadly blow in Israel. This time, a suicide bomber on a bus in Tel Aviv blew himself up and at least 21 others.
In a live interview on cable's CBN network, Netanyahu had this to say.
This tragedy, what do you think? Is it going to hurt the Labor Party or turn public opinion against the peace process?
Well, I don't know about electoral results, and it's not my immediate concern. My immediate concern is for a genuine peace process, and the public in Israel is for peace, not a false peace, a real peace. That's the kind of peace we have with Jordan. Everybody's for it. We in the Likud supported it. I personally met with Crown Prince Hassan because we know that in the case of Jordan, we have a partner that wants to live in peace next to us, side by side next to Israel. In the case of the PLO, we have a partner that wants to live in peace instead of Israel. And that's the whole difference. The PLO has been given, in fact, Gaza and Jericho, they've become terrorist havens where the PLO is giving effective shelter for the Hamas terrorists. They're not doing anything to them. In fact, in many ways, Hamas has become the military arm of the PLO. So from there they strike, to there they return, and we're supposed to sit back and do nothing. And I think that's the core mistake. I think we have to bring back security to the Jewish state. There can't be peace without security, so we have to restore security.
Well, now, your call is a permanent close down of the Gaza Strip in terms of any access to Israel. Am I correct in that?
Well, it's the first thing that has to be done, because today what has happened is we got out, the PLO and Hamas got in, but they can re-enter Israel at will. We can't re-enter Gaza. Now, I'm not suggesting that we re-enter Gaza. I am saying that at the moment when there's obviously no capacity to control terrorism within Gaza, since the PLO is doing nothing, literally not lifting a finger, then the first thing we should do is enclose Gaza and make sure that terrorists do not come in through with the 20,000 or so workers who pass through Gaza every day. I think beyond that, the larger question is, what is the general direction of this process? It's not moving towards peace. It's moving towards terror. It's moving to an arrangement where the PLO, through diplomacy, receives terror from which Hamas then launches terrorist attacks against us. Rather, the PLO receives territory from which Hamas then launches terror attacks against us to wreak more territory. I say we have to put a stop to that. I say that real peace means that we have security. The only security, or the only power that can enforce security and fight terrorism is not the Arafat. He's not going to do it. The only party that will do it is Israel, and that's what we want to see. We want to see the Israeli army given, again, responsibility to fight terrorism.
Israeli President Ezer Weizman forthrightly placed the blame.
Number one, we'll have to find out where are the roots of the evil, and I think we know some of the roots, if not all of them, and cut them and chop them to pieces.
Echoing a similar theme of outrage, President Bill Clinton, addressing the Israeli parliament, deplored terror against Jews.
So long as Jews are murdered just because they are Jews or just because they are citizens of Israel, the plague of anti-Semitism lives, and we must stand against it. We must stand against terror as strongly as we stand for peace. For without an end to terror, there can be no peace. The forces of terror and extremism still threaten us all. Sometimes they pretend to act in the name of God and country, but their deeds violate their own religious faith and make a mockery of any notion of honorable patriotism.
Tempers flared as left-wing demonstrators were attacked by Israelis angered with the government's handling of the peace process. Demonstrations erupted all over Israel following the bombing. A makeshift memorial to the slain sprouted on Dizengoff Street, where yahrzeit candles were lit night after night in memory of the fallen.
Corporal Nachshon Waxman was a happy-go-lucky 19-year-old soldier from the remote neighborhood of Jerusalem. Hitching a ride from his base near Tel Aviv, Waxman was picked up by 3 men wearing yarmulkes, one of whom spoke fluent Hebrew. Waxman soon discovered this to be a ruse. He was actually in the hands of Hamas. A week-long drama ensued with Hamas, demanding the release of 200 prisoners, threatening to kill Waxman by Friday, October 14th, if their demands were not met. Waxman's parents, Esther and Yehuda, observant Jews, inspired the world with their faith and calm. A videotape released by Hamas showed a terrified Waxman asking the government to comply with the kidnappers. Waxman's parents begged the terrorists to release their son and called on all Jews to pray for his release. 50,000 flocked to the Western Wall to do so. Hours before Nachshon's murder, Esther Waxman asked Jewish women everywhere to light a Shabbat candle for her son, and many women lit candles for the first time in their lives. On Friday afternoon, Israeli police ascertained Waxman's whereabouts in the Arab village of Bir Nebalah, just 5 miles from Waxman's Jerusalem home. Hours before the kidnappers' deadline, Israeli forces stormed the terrorist hideout, killing Waxman's abductors, but not before Waxman himself was slain by the Hamas people. Killed also was Captain Nir Poraz, 23, leader of the unsuccessful rescue team. On the same day, Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Yasser Arafat were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The Waxman murder didn't displease everyone. Hamas praised the Waxman's death, calling the operation heroic, calling his killers great. The Hamas statement said the operation, in which our heroes took the Zionist soldier Waxman prisoner of war, was great and heroic, and that the violent conclusion came contrary to what the Zionist war General Rabin wanted. Howard?
Caroline, a popular place for sidewalk cafes and restaurants, Jerusalem's Yoel Solomon Street was the scene the week before of bloody carnage as Hamas terrorists, guns blazing, opened fire on the crowd, killing 2 and wounding a dozen. The rapid rise in terror and the killing of Jews is being attributed to a clandestine alliance between the PLO and Hamas. Intelligence experts are asserting that Hamas is operating unhindered by the PLO in Gaza and Jericho, and that the PLO and Hamas are playing a good cop, bad cop role. The experts also maintain that various PLO members are switching sides and working with Hamas. Top Israeli generals testifying before the Knesset have repeatedly stated that Hamas and the PLO share the same goal, the destruction of Israel. Caroline, did you know that in the 14 months after the signing of the Israel-PLO Accords, that the PLO still hasn't rescinded its covenant calling for Israel's destruction?
Peace with the PLO may be impossible, but peace with Jordan has become a reality. To the cheers of 5,000 guests, Israel and Jordan signed a formal peace treaty beneath a scorching desert sun on October 26th. Signing the treaty were Prime Minister Rabin, Jordanian Prime Minister Majali, and witnessed by President Clinton. Watching were Eliakim Rubinstein, who negotiated the treaty, King Hussein, Warren Christopher, and others. Flags of all three countries were flying. Officers from the one-time enemies saluted one another and exchanged gifts, and thousands of balloons were let loose, symbolizing hope for the future. President Clinton expressed his optimism as well.
Peace is more than an agreement on paper. It is feeling, it is activity, it is devotion.
Israeli soldiers placed flowers on the graves of those who died in Israel's wars as a sign that even in peace, those who made the ultimate sacrifice are not forgotten. The treaty resolves border and water disputes, provides for economic cooperation, opens borders for tourism, and a pledge not to allow third parties to use their countries as staging grounds for aggression. The treaty passed by 105-3 vote in the Knesset.
One treaty provision recognizes the status quo on Jerusalem, where Jordan has run the Muslim holy sites for decades. This and the treaty as a whole set off a wholesale Arab general strike throughout Gaza and the territories. Palestinian Arabs' scorn for peace could be seen in the trampling of U.S. and Israeli flags on the floor outside a mosque, and by clashes between rock-throwing youths and the Israeli army. Street demonstrations were also prevalent. American and Israeli officials expressed dismay over the PLO's condemnation of the Israel-Jordanian treaty. Caroline?
Touring the Middle East, President Clinton visited Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Syria, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. The shuttle diplomacy started in Egypt, where Clinton met with Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak and PLO chief Yasser Arafat. The president and Arafat spoke about clamping down on Hamas. While Arafat was vague on his commitment, the president felt satisfied.
That once you become a partner in the peace process, you have to fight for peace. And those who seek to undermine it are seeking to undermine you. I think he clearly understands that, and I was satisfied with the answer I received.
Clinton visited Syria, a nation that officially sponsors terrorism and is engaged in drug trafficking. Meeting with Syria's Hafez Assad for the second time this year, the president received little from Assad to make peace with Syria seem like a possibility soon. On friendlier turf in Amman, Jordan, he pledged U.S. support for Jordan as a result of its having made peace. Officially visiting Israel for the first time, the President and Mrs. Clinton were met at Ben Gurion Airport by Israeli President Ezer Weizmann. The two presidents reviewed an honor guard of soldiers and sailors. The President reaffirmed America's friendship with the Jewish state.
America, as always, is proud to stand with you. We intend to remain by your side in the years ahead.
The big flashpoint was Jerusalem. Staying at the King David Hotel, Clinton addressed the Knesset, laid a wreath to Israel's fallen, but never made it past the western half of the city. A visit to holy sites in the Old City was scotched, apparently due to Arab protests over the president being accompanied to the Old City by Jerusalem Mayor Ehud Olmert, a Jew. Hillary Clinton visited the Western Wall, Judaism's holiest site, in her husband's place, going with Mayor Olmert and the rabbi of the wall, Yehuda Getz. Mrs. Clinton placed a prayer note in the wall, as is customary by many people who visit there. Yasser Arafat declared that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Palestinian people, and addressing 1,000 students in Gaza said that anyone who doesn't like it can come to Gaza and drink seawater. Caroline, Arafat's really pushing the Jerusalem hot buttons.
That's right, Howard. Despite Arafat's statements in October, 279 members of Congress sent a letter to President Clinton expressing overwhelming support for united Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and only Israel's capital. The letter was sponsored by soon-to-be House Speaker Newt Gingrich and New York's Charles Schumer. Also in the Senate, 65 senators wrote to the administration expressing concerns and objections to a high-tech spy satellite sale to Saudi Arabia. The satellite would allow the Saudis to photograph objects as small as 3 feet. The senator said such a satellite could easily photograph U.S. and Israeli troop movements.
Moving to Hebron, the Cave of the Patriarchs, burial place for Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah, Judaism's second holiest place, was reopened on a trial basis after new security measures were instituted to prevent the kind of incident committed by Baruch Goldstein last winter. Arabs in Hebron claim the shrine is a mosque only and accuse Israel of trying to turn it into a synagogue. The new arrangements physically separate the two groups and accord exclusive use on 10 Muslim and Jewish holy days. Here to discuss this is Dr. Manfred Lehman. Dr. Lehman has published many articles in archaeological journals about the cave and shrine, and Dr. Lehman is also a columnist in many Jewish newspapers across the country. Dr. Lehman, let me ask you first of all, what are the sources behind the Tomb of the Patriarchs? Media reports give a lot of credence to it being a mosque. Are there archaeological sources for this site that bolster the Jewish claim at all?
Yes, well, definitely. We as a people have been around longer than any other nation in the area. We've been there for 3,600 years. And the very first transaction, the first purchase of land by a Jew was exactly this site of the Machpelah, which was carried out by our forefather Abraham. And he followed the archaeologically proven rules and regulations of the Hittites, who were then in charge. And when he bought that land, the piece of land, he did so not for himself, he did it for his wife Sarah and buried her there. It was called Machpelah because it was a double cave, and that has only come out recently when there were excavations that there are 2 areas, 2 levels in that cave, and there are bones in all of these areas, which means that several people are buried there, which bears out the Jewish claim that there are 6 patriarchs and matriarchs buried there, and not one of those that are claimed by the Arabs. You know, the Arabs claim they are descendants of who, you know? The Bible tells you about Hagar.
Well, Dr. Lehman, let me ask you, do the Arabs say that any of their forefathers are buried there?
Well, they claim, of course, Abraham as their ancestor, but they have no explanation why there are 5 others, and they have no explanation why their own ancestors, that is Hagar or their ancestor Ishmael, they're not buried there. It was strictly for Sarah, who is an ancestor of the Jews only. So therefore, there could never have been any shrine for the Arabs. But if you can skip now another 1,500 years or so.
Dr. Lehman, you're anticipating my next question, which is, I've seen pictures of the building, the shrine, the Cave of the Patriarchs. It looks a lot like the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Who built this building?
Well, it's no coincidence. It was built by one and the same king, King Herod, who was a very mighty builder. He was known for doing the most fantastic building projects of that period. He was known even in Rome at the time. He built up the Temple Mount, and then he went on to build up the Machpelah in the same style, the same masonry, the same architecture, which means that at that time there were no holier sites for the Jewish people than Jerusalem with the Temple and Machpelah in Hebron. And this, of course, is proof of the fact that at that time, before Christianity was thought of, before Islam, hundreds and hundreds of years before Islam, it was the holiest site for Jews. And there were many other reasons. King David, for example, was crowned in Hebron. King David was Hebron was his capital for 7 years, which means that Hebron has also sanctity for the Christian people who are interested in King David. But we take, of course...
Let me ask you, Dr. Lehman, when did the shrine actually become a mosque?
Well, that was, of course, about 700 years after the structure that we see today was built. After all, the Muslims only captured the Holy Land in the year 638. That was many years after Muhammad had died. Muhammad didn't have any interest in Palestine. In fact, it was a Christian country at that time. Jerusalem had no sanctity to him whatsoever. Jerusalem is never mentioned in the Quran. It is mentioned 825 times in the Jewish Bible, just like Hebron, for example, is mentioned 76 times in the Bible and 0 times in the Quran.
Let me ask you, getting back to the Shrine of the Patriarchs, the Cave of the Patriarchs. So you're saying that the Muslims did not demolish the existing Jewish building that was on the site, and that it survived the Romans too?
Not at all. They left it exactly intact, except they added a tower. You know, a tower is usually a sign of a mosque because they have the announcements made for prayer up there. But that made it look like a mosque, but it was never a mosque. It was for thousands of years before Islam was founded already a Jewish sacred place.
Let me ask you, Doctor, what were Jewish rites at the Tomb of the Patriarchs prior to 1967 in Israel?
Well, that was a very, very unfortunate thing. The moment the Muslims took over, they expelled all infidels, which means Christians and Jews, were barred from the mosque, and they were only given permission to walk up 7 steps, but that's of course outside of the mosque. They were not allowed inside. And my hunch is, the reason for that is that they made the claim that this mosque only holds the tomb of Abraham, which is the one that they could claim as an ancestor. They didn't want anybody to find out that in fact there were at least 6 graves there, all of Jewish ancestors. And therefore they kept infidels out, Christians and Jews. And even in 1839, when
what's the advantage to the Muslims? What's their motivation to even want to keep this shrine and to keep Jews out? And moreover, can Jews and Arabs get along together in that space, in that place?
Well, I think now you're coming to a very important basic question that affects the whole Middle East, and that's the whole problem we have with the Arabs. I think it's a misconstruction, misinterpretation by them of what the original Muslim religion meant. In the Quran, you have some very, very friendly pronouncements, not only about Jews, but also about the Jewish rights to the Holy Land. There is a verse which has never been publicized, but is very important in the 17th Surah, verse 105, where Allah says, and Muhammad quotes him, "I said to the children of Israel, dwell ye in the land, and in the end of days I will bring you back from among all the nations." Now this was not said by Theodor Herzl, it was said by Muhammad, which means that...
So you're basically saying that his descendants are ignoring what the Quran has to say?
Yes, and I think a solution to all our problems would be if sensible theologians on the Muslim side would sit down with us and reinterpret the Quran, what really is written there, what Muhammad really felt about Jews, and whether or not a common ground can be found.
So expelling Jews from Hebron and from the Tomb of the Patriarchs, you don't think is a good idea?
Not only is it not a good idea, it's not even the spirit of Muhammad, because he's the one who promised the Jews to return to the land, and that land, of course, includes Jerusalem, it includes Hebron, because he had no interest in the Holy Land at all. Even they claim sometimes that the Aqsa Mosque has something to do with the Quran. It doesn't. In the days of Muhammad, the Aqsa Mosque was a church. It was called the Church of St. Mary. It became a mosque many, many years, 80 years after Muhammad died. So there's no claim there at all.
Dr. Lehman, let me thank you for being with us tonight. These insights, especially the archaeological ones, very, very helpful to our viewers, I think. And again, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
11 former high-ranking American generals and admirals came out against stationing U.S. troops on the Golan Heights. In a 23-page report by the Center for Security Policy, the generals stated that there is no mission or rationale for U.S. peacekeeping force on the Golan that would justify the resulting costs and risks. The net effect would be negative for Israel's security and regional stability, while it would cost U.S. lives, a possible U.S. retreat under terrorist fire, and increase the danger of direct U.S. involvement in a future Middle East war and undermine Israel's standing with the American public as a self-reliant ally.
The recent revolutionary changeover in Congress as a result of the recent elections will place Senator Jesse Helms as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Republican sentiment is against positioning U.S. troops on the Golan Heights. This has the Rabin government worried and the Likud delighted. Senator Helms says the Syrians want access to your pocketbook through the U.S. Treasury and are not interested in peace with Israel, but in getting back the Golan Heights lost in the 1967 war.
The Likud's Benjamin Netanyahu made this distinction between peace with Syria and peace with Jordan.
With Syria, as with the PLO, we have this continual feeling, this continual suspicion that is evidenced by many, many instances that what Syria really wants is the Golan Heights from which they could attack us again. After all, they had the Golan Heights and attacked us for 19 years. And it's like the PLO. They want the high grounds above our cities from which they can wage a future war. So we don't have the confidence with Syria or with the PLO. We have full confidence with Jordan, with Tunisia, with Morocco, with the other parts of the Arab world. We really identify two types of partners. Those who want genuine peace, with them we want peace. Those who want a tactical peace to prepare the ground for the next war, well, obviously we don't want that.
The Golan residents themselves have been waging a vigorous PR campaign to bolster support for Israeli retention of the Golan, a view already supported by the majority of Jews. The Golan residents have been running this commercial in Israeli movie theaters.
לא די לשאת מילים על רמת הגולן. יש לממש אותה בבנייה, בתעסוקה. לא יעלה על הדעת שגם בשלום נרד מרמת הגולן. מי שיעלה על הדעת לרדת מרמת הגולן יפקיר את ביטחון ישראל. אנא, כולנו יחד, בואו נשקיע כאן. כך בלבד נממש את מחויבותנו לרמת הגולן. ולכם המתיישבים, אתם העושים את רמת הגולן למה שהיא. כל הכבוד לכם.
Howard, did you know that a recent American Jewish Committee survey found that only 7% of American Jews favor returning most or all of the Golan to Syria, and that more than 2/3 believe Syria isn't interested in real peace?
You know, Caroline, I just got a hold of a Mideast Forum survey that was conducted of Americans, and of Americans polled, it's 4-1 against positioning U.S. troops on the Golan. And notwithstanding the treaty with Jordan, American Jews are worried about the future of the Golan, Jerusalem, and the territories. And a Gallup poll published in Israel right after the Dizengoff bombing shows that 77% of Israelis oppose resuming peace negotiations with the PLO in terms of making further withdrawals.
If any of our viewers would like more information about the issues discussed here tonight, a copy of this program or of prior shows, the address and the phone number will follow shortly.
On behalf of Caroline and everyone here at the Jewish News Network, I'm Howard Barbanel, thanking you for letting us share a piece of our world with yours.
Thank you and good night. See you here next time.
Bye-bye.